You've started over more times than you can count, and every time it felt real. The plan was solid. The intention was genuine. Something in you actually meant it. But somewhere between the decision and the follow-through, the same thing happened again. And now you're here, not broken, not lazy, but exhausted in a way that motivation can't fix. Exhausted from wanting to change and watching yourself not change. From knowing exactly what you should do and still not doing it. From being the only witness to a cycle that never seems to end. This video is not about motivation. It's not about a new system or a better habit stack. It's about something underneath all of that. The real reason change keeps escaping you, and what finally happens when you stop running the same loop. You've been here before, not almost here, exactly here. The same night, the same quiet, the same feeling sitting in your chest like something you forgot to finish. You told yourself last time was the last time. You meant it. You actually meant it. And that's what makes this moment harder than any of the ones before it. Because you can no longer pretend you didn't know better. There's a specific kind of tired that doesn't come from working too hard. It comes from starting over, from waking up with intention and watching it dissolve before noon, from writing down goals that feel real at night and meaningless by morning, from being the only one who knows how many times you've reset the clock, deleted the notes, closed the journal, and told yourself tomorrow is different. Nobody sees that. Nobody counts that with you. That weight is entirely yours, and the weight isn't failure most people think it is. They think what breaks them is not reaching the goal. But you already know that's not it. What actually breaks something inside you is recognizing yourself in the pattern. It's the moment you realize you are not struggling against circumstances anymore. You are struggling against a version of yourself that keeps showing up right when you decide to change. You come home tired, tell yourself you'll start properly on Monday, check your phone for something that isn't there, and somewhere in that small, quiet moment, you feel it. A kind of disappointment that doesn't make a sound. That silence is the part nobody talks about. The promises you break aren't always dramatic. They don't always involve falling apart publicly or losing something visible. Sometimes it's just the small private betrayals. The workout you skipped, the hour you wasted, the apology you rehearsed and never gave. You forgave yourself. You moved on. But something in you kept score, not to punish you, something deeper than that. Something that started to wonder whether your word to yourself means anything at all. Self-trust doesn't break all at once. It erodes, slowly, quietly, through repetition. Every time you promised yourself something and didn't follow through, the next promise started with a little less weight behind it, a little less belief. Until one day you're making plans that feel more like rituals than intentions. You're going through the motions of someone who wants to change, while a quieter part of you already knows how this ends. That's the loop. Not laziness, not weakness, a slow erosion of the one relationship that holds everything else together. The hard thing to sit with, the thing that actually matters, is that you cannot motivate your way out of this. You've already tried that. You've had the moments of clarity. You felt the fire. And it fades, every time. Not because you're broken, but because motivation was never the foundation. It was the surface. What's underneath is either solid or it isn't. And right now, for most people watching this, something underneath has been quietly cracking for a while. That crack is not the end of the story, but it is the beginning of an honest one. And for the first time in a long time, you're not looking away from it. What if the struggle isn't what you think it is? What if the thing keeping you stuck isn't laziness, isn't fear, isn't even lack of willpower, but something that actually feels good? Something you keep returning to not because it hurts you, but because, in a very quiet way, it feeds you. Think about the last time you started something new. A new routine, a new goal, a new plan laid out on paper or typed into your phone at midnight. Remember how that felt. There was something alive in that moment, a kind of lightness, like possibility had weight, and you were finally holding it. You felt like a different person already. Just from deciding, just from the idea of it. And for a few hours, maybe a few days, you carried that feeling around like it meant something had already changed. It hadn't, but it felt like it had. And that feeling, that specific feeling, is the thing worth examining because the brain doesn't always distinguish between doing something and vividly imagining doing it. When you research the program, build the schedule, watch the videos, picture yourself 6 months from now, there's a real emotional reward happening. Real enough to feel like progress. Real enough to satisfy something in you that was looking for relief. And so the cycle begins, not with weakness, but with a very human tendency to chase the feeling of beginning rather than endure the reality of continuing. Starting is electric. Continuing is quiet, and most people, without ever realizing it, become addicted to the electricity. This isn't a character flaw, it's a pattern, and it's worth understanding rather than judging. Novelty is genuinely stimulating. A new goal arrives with no history of failure attached to it. It has no record. It hasn't disappointed you yet. There's no memory of quitting baked into it. No evidence of your own inconsistency waiting in the background. A new start is clean, and there is profound psychological comfort in clean. So you stay close to beginnings. You return to them, you plan again, research again, reframe the goal slightly. Maybe a different approach this time. A better system. And the relief returns. For a while, what you have been avoiding is not the work itself. It's the specific texture of the work after the excitement leaves. The Tuesday morning when nothing feels meaningful, and you do it anyway. The week where there is no visible progress, and you show up regardless. The version of yourself that nobody sees building something, not because it's dramatic, but because it's necessary. That version doesn't get the rush of a new beginning. It doesn't get the warmth of imagining a future self. It just gets the quiet, unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable experience of becoming someone through repetition. And that discomfort, the absence of emotional reward, is precisely what most people mistake for a sign that something is wrong. That it's not the right goal, that the timing is off, that they need a better plan. So they go back to planning, back to that clean, hopeful, manageable feeling, back to the beginning. The shift doesn't come from more motivation. It comes from recognizing what you've actually been loyal to. Not the goal, not the future version of yourself, but the feeling of almost starting, the comfortable edge of potential, where nothing has been tested yet and everything still seems possible. Recognizing that is uncomfortable, which means it might be the first real step you've taken in a long time. You know the conversation. You've had it 1,000 times, and it always starts the same way. Not with giving up, but with reasoning. With a voice inside that sounds surprisingly calm, surprisingly fair, surprisingly like someone who has your best interests at heart. It says, "You're tired today. Rest makes sense." It says, "One day won't matter." It says, "You'll be sharper tomorrow, more prepared, in a better place to do this properly." And the frightening thing is, it's never entirely wrong. That's why you keep listening. But at some point, if you're honest, you have to look at what that voice has actually built for you. You have to look at the gap between where you are and where you keep saying you're going, and ask yourself how many times that reasonable, understanding, endlessly patient voice talked you out of the thing that would have moved you forward. Not once, not occasionally, consistently, reliably. Every time the moment asked something real from you, that internal negotiation is not self-awareness. It dresses like self-care, of strategy, of timing. But underneath it is something simpler, the preference for comfort over commitment. And it doesn't feel like weakness when it's happening, it feels like wisdom. That's what makes it so effective. Most people believe their problem is discipline. They think if they could just feel more motivated, more energized, more certain, they would follow through. So they wait for that feeling. They structure their life around chasing the right internal conditions. And on the days those conditions appear, they move. On the days they don't, they negotiate. What they haven't yet understood is that waiting for readiness is its own kind of decision. A quiet one, made by default rather than intention. The turning point, when it actually comes, doesn't look the way people expect. It's not dramatic. There's no moment of sudden fire or clarity that removes all resistance. It's quieter than that. It's the morning you wake up feeling nothing particularly useful and you do the thing anyway. Not because you've conquered yourself, but because you've simply stopped asking yourself how you feel about it. The question changes. It stops being, "Do I want to do this right now?" and becomes, "Is this what I said I would do?" One question opens a negotiation, the other closes it. That shift, from mood-based to decision-based, is where something real begins. Not because it's easy, because it's no longer dependent on easy. You train your body on the days your body resists. You work in private on the nights you're tired and no one is watching. You save the money even when spending it would feel better in the short term. Not through gritted teeth and self-punishment, but through a quiet understanding that the decision was already made. This moment is just honoring it. What changes isn't the difficulty. The work stays hard. The resistance doesn't disappear. What changes is that you stop treating every day as a new vote on whether the commitment still stands. You made the decision once, seriously, completely. And now the only question is execution. There is a version of you that no longer wakes up and negotiates. That version doesn't have more willpower, doesn't feel more motivated, just decided at some point to stop giving the conversation permission to happen. You already know what needs to be done. The only thing left is to stop asking yourself if you feel like doing it. Nobody warns you that real progress feels like nothing. Not like winning. Not like clarity arriving on a quiet morning. Not like a moment you could point to later and say, "That was when everything shifted." It feels like Wednesday. Like doing the same thing you did Tuesday with roughly the same result, in roughly the same silence, with no particular signal that any of it is working. That's what they never put in the story. The part where nothing feels like it's happening, and you have to keep going anyway. You expected it to feel different by now. Some part of you believed that if you stayed consistent long enough, the repetition would start to feel meaningful. That the routine would carry its own momentum, its own quiet satisfaction. and sometimes it does. But most days, it just feels like the routine, like making the same meal, walking the same path, doing the work without ceremony or confirmation. And somewhere inside that ordinariness, a question starts to form. Not loudly, but persistently. Is this actually doing anything? That question is the real test. Not willpower, not motivation, the ability to keep moving when the evidence is invisible. Here is what no one tells you about the period when change is actually happening. It is profoundly unimpressive from the inside. The body changing doesn't announce itself daily. The mind becoming steadier doesn't send a notification. The character being rebuilt through repeated choices looks, from where you're standing, almost identical to last month. There are no applause moments in the middle. There is just the next day, and the decision to meet it the same way you met the one before. Most people leave right before that starts to mean something. Not because they're weak, because nothing in their environment told them the boredom was proof it was working. They'd been trained by everything around them to expect visible feedback, rapid results, a sign. And when the sign doesn't come, they start interpreting the silence as failure. They assume that if it were really working, they'd feel it more clearly. So they change the approach, find something new, return without realizing it to the cycle from the beginning. What you have to understand, and sit with even when it's uncomfortable, is that identity doesn't change in the dramatic moments. It changes in the repetitive ones. Not when you push through something hard and feel proud of it, but when you do the ordinary thing on an ordinary day and feel almost nothing, and do it again anyway. That's where the actual reshaping happens. In the accumulation of unremarkable actions that nobody sees, including you, until one day the person in the mirror has quietly become someone different. That person didn't arrive through a breakthrough, they arrived through Tuesday. Through the training session that felt mechanical, through the early morning that felt pointless, through the work done in private with no audience and no reward except the fact that it was done, through boredom, honored rather than escaped. This is hard to accept because you live in a moment where everything is designed to be stimulating, where attention is currency and novelty is constant. Learning to find steadiness inside repetition isn't just discipline. In this environment, it is resistance. It is one of the quietest and most serious things a person can do. The days that feel like nothing are not empty. They are the ones doing the most work. You just can't see it yet. Something starts to feel wrong, but you can't name it. Nothing bad has happened. Nobody hurt you. There's no obvious reason for the distance you feel settling in around your life. But something has shifted. The places that used to feel comfortable now feel slightly too small. The conversations that used to hold your attention now leave you quiet. You sit in the same room with the same people and feel, for reasons you can't explain, like you're watching it all from somewhere just outside of it. And instead of recognizing that for what it is, most people assume something is wrong with them. You start wondering if you've become cold, distant, difficult. You question whether all this time spent working in private, choosing silence over noise, has made you strange in some way. Because the people around you haven't changed. The environment is the same. The only variable is you. And so you carry a quiet guilt about it, this inexplicable feeling of no longer fitting inside the life that used to fit perfectly. What you're experiencing is not coldness, it's not arrogance, and it's not isolation. It's the specific, largely unspoken grief of outgrowing something. And grief is the right word, even if it surprises you. Because something is genuinely ending. A version of yourself that belonged comfortably in that environment, that laughed at those things, that wanted what those conversations promised. That version is fading. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just quietly, the way light leaves a room in the evening. Gradually, and then completely. Nobody prepares you for this part. The personal development content shows you the discipline, the habits, the mindset. It doesn't show you the Sunday afternoon where you come home from a family gathering feeling lonelier than if you'd stayed home. It doesn't show you the friendship that slowly becomes a series of polite exchanges because the deeper conversation no longer has a natural place to land. It doesn't show you the version of your old life that starts to feel like a coat you've outgrown. Familiar. Yours, but no longer something you can wear without noticing the tightness. The temptation in that moment is to go back, to shrink slightly, to perform the version of yourself that still fits, just to relieve the discomfort of the gap. And many people do this, unconsciously, for years. They grow in private and contract in public. They carry two versions of themselves, the one becoming and the one everyone still recognizes. That tension is exhausting in a way that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. What needs to be understood, even when it's painful, is that the discomfort is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that something has gone right, far enough that the old container no longer holds the shape of who you're becoming. The distance you feel isn't rejection, it's proportion. You are simply no longer the same size as the space you used to inhabit. There is grief in that. Real grief. Allow it. The life you're leaving behind wasn't meaningless. The relationships that feel strained weren't failures. The old version of you that felt at home there wasn't lesser. It was just earlier. And honoring what was doesn't require returning to it. Growth creates distance before it creates clarity. That is the part no one warns you about. You will feel the distance long before you understand what it was making room for. But something in you already knew it was necessary. That's why you kept going, even when it cost you the comfort of feeling like you belonged somewhere. You're still doing it. That's the part that makes this stage so quietly brutal. You haven't quit. You haven't gone back to the old pattern. You're showing up, doing the work, honoring the commitment. And the evidence is simply not there yet. No visible shift. No moment where someone notices and says something. No number, no mirror, no result that confirms the effort means anything. Just you, alone with the process, wondering in the back of your mind whether the whole thing is working or whether you've been disciplined in the wrong direction. That doubt doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives in small moments. You check and compare. You do the math on how long you've been at this and measure it against how little seems to have changed. You catch yourself thinking maybe the approach is wrong, maybe the timing is off, maybe someone else's method would show faster results. And underneath all of it, quieter than the rest, is a question you don't quite want to ask directly. What if I'm doing everything right and it still doesn't work? That question is where most people break. Not from exhaustion, from the absence of confirmation. Here is something worth understanding about the way real change actually moves. It doesn't accumulate visibly, it accumulates structurally, beneath the surface in ways that don't show up in a reflection or a number or a reaction from someone else. The body rebuilding itself doesn't post updates. The mind becoming steadier under pressure doesn't announce milestones. The financial discipline practiced in small, invisible decisions doesn't look like progress until suddenly it does. And by then, the transformation has been complete for longer than you realized. You were changing while you were convinced nothing was changing. That's not a flaw in the process. It's the nature of compounding. Nothing seems to move, and then everything moves at once, but only for the person who stayed through the nothing. The people who left during the silence never see what the silence was building. They carry a permanent question mark about whether it would have worked, and that question mark becomes its own kind of weight. What makes this stage genuinely dangerous is that your old doubts return wearing new clothes. They don't sound like fear anymore. They sound like reason. They sound like you finally being realistic, finally being smart enough to reassess, finally having enough data to make an informed decision. But the data they're using is incomplete. It's measuring a process that hasn't finished moving yet and concluding it isn't moving at all. You have to learn to read absence differently. The fact that results haven't appeared doesn't mean effort isn't accumulating. It means you haven't yet reached the threshold where accumulation becomes visible. That threshold is real. It exists. But it only reveals itself to the people still present when it arrives. This is the stage where your relationship with validation gets tested at its deepest level. Every previous chapter prepared you for this. The decision made once and honored. The boredom embraced. The identity quietly rebuilding. All of it was leading here, to the moment where none of it looks like it's working, and you have to decide, without any external evidence, whether you trust what you've been building. The results are not missing. They are not ready to be seen yet. There is a profound difference between those two things. And knowing which one is true right now might be the most important thing you hold on to. Something is different. And for once, you're not imagining it. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive the way you expected. No single morning where everything clicks. No dramatic confirmation that the work was worth it. It's more like a series of small moments that you almost miss. You handle something that would have unraveled you 6 months ago, and you notice, almost after the fact, that you handled it. You make a decision without the usual internal negotiation. You wake up and move without having to convince yourself first. And somewhere in the accumulation of those small, quiet moments, something becomes undeniable. You are not the same person who started this. The first thing that changes isn't visible to anyone else. It's the relationship between your word and your actions. Somewhere during the weeks of showing up without reward, of honoring the commitment when nothing external enforced it, of doing the private work that no one tracked, you rebuilt something that had been quietly breaking for a long time. You started keeping promises to yourself. Not perfectly, but consistently enough that when you make a decision now, some deeper part of you actually believes it will happen. That belief is not confidence in the motivational sense. It's something quieter, more structural. It feels less like excitement and more like solidity. That's how earned self-respect actually feels. Not triumphant. Steady. You notice it in the way you respond to pressure now. A conversation that would have pulled you into reaction, into over-explaining, into saying more than you meant. You let it pass. Not because you stopped caring, but because something inside you no longer needs to prove itself in real time. The stability you built in private is now present in public. Without announcement, without performance, people may not be able to name what's different about you, but something registers. Something in the quality of your stillness communicates what no words could. The discipline that once required effort is beginning to require less. Not because the work got easier, but because the identity has started catching up with the behavior. For a long time, you were acting like the person you wanted to become, while still feeling like the person you were trying to leave. That gap created friction, but repetition, sustained long enough, closes the gap. The actions that once felt like discipline start feeling like character. What you do and who you are begin to align, and that alignment is something you can feel, a kind of internal coherence that was missing during all those months of trying. This is not the end of difficulty. Harder seasons exist beyond this one, and you'll face them. But you'll face them differently. Not because you've removed doubt, but because you now have actual evidence to stand on when doubt arrives. You're not arguing with your own history anymore. You're drawing from it. Every kept commitment is a deposit into something that cannot be taken by circumstance or opinion. It belongs entirely to you. What you're discovering is that genuine confidence has almost nothing to do with how things look from the outside, and everything to do with the private record you've been building with yourself. The small decisions honored when no one was watching. The standard maintained when it would have been easier to lower it. The silence chosen over the reaction. The long mourning that required everything and received no recognition. That record exists. It's real. And for the first time in a long time, when you look at yourself honestly, the evidence supports what you see. That is not a small thing. For someone who has spent years doubting their own follow-through, that might be everything. There will be a moment, quiet, unremarkable from the outside, where you look back at who you were and genuinely don't recognize them. Not with contempt, not with superiority. Just with the clean, still feeling of distance, like reading a letter written by someone who shared your name but carried an entirely different weight. You'll remember the patterns, the negotiations, the late nights staring at a ceiling running the same loop. You'll remember what it felt like to need permission from your own mood before you could move. And it will feel, strangely, like remembering someone else's life. That moment doesn't announce itself. It arrives gently, usually in an ordinary situation. Someone says something that once would have destabilized you for days, and you feel nothing urgent. Not numbness. Steadiness. You make a decision without consulting your fear first. You sit in discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. And somewhere in that ordinary moment, the full distance between then and now becomes clear. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing dramatic needed to. The transformation you once imagined would feel like an arrival turns out to feel more like a recognition. Not I finally made it, but this is simply who I am now. The standards you once had to fight to maintain have become the floor you stand on without thinking. The discipline that once cost you something in the morning now costs you your identity rather than your willpower. You didn't build habits, you built a person. And that person is standing here looking back. What's worth understanding and sitting with is that none of this happened in a single moment you can point to. There was no turning point visible enough to photograph. The old version of you wasn't replaced dramatically. It was replaced gradually, through thousands of decisions so small they barely registered. The morning you moved through resistance without acknowledging it. The money saved while everyone else spent. The reaction you didn't have. The conversation you walked away from because peace mattered more than being right. The work done in private that nobody counted but you. Each of those moments seemed minor. Collectively, they became everything. The old fears still exist somewhere in memory, but they no longer live in the body the way they once did. The validation you once needed from other people has been replaced by something internal. Not arrogance, not indifference, but a settled relationship with your own standards. You know what you've done. You know what it cost. And that knowledge doesn't need to be spoken aloud or confirmed by anyone outside of you. People who knew you before may sense the change without being able to name it. Some will be drawn to it. Some will be unsettled by it. Neither response is your responsibility to manage. You long ago stopped building yourself around how your changes landed in rooms full of people who hadn't changed with you. The old life wasn't bad. The old you wasn't broken. They were just earlier, a version equipped for a smaller set of demands, carrying a heavier set of fears. You don't owe that version grief. But you also don't owe it your return. What you built through the silence, through the invisible seasons, through the grief of outgrowing, and the discipline of continuing, that is not something that can be taken back by a hard week or a moment of doubt. It's structural now. It lives in how you carry yourself through ordinary days. The stranger looking back from that earlier chapter of your life didn't know this version of you was coming. But every decision they finally kept was a step toward the person you just became. If you made it here, something in this video found you at the right moment. Not by accident. You don't sit with content like this unless some part of you is already serious about what comes next. That part deserves to be fed consistently. This channel exists for the people rebuilding quietly, without applause, without a clear timeline, without anyone in their immediate life who fully understands the process. If that is you, subscribe. Not for content, for company on a road that can feel very solitary. Leave a comment below, even one word about where you are in this process. Someone else will read it and feel less alone. And if this video moved something in you, pass it to one person who needs it. Not to go viral, because that person is probably waiting for someone to finally say what this said. You found it. Now keep going.